Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast, where we delve into innovative approaches to child development and education. I'm your host, Sarah Collins, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by our guest, Kokeb McDonald. In this episode, we'll explore the power of play-based and low-stress techniques in fostering children's growth through integrating primitive reflexes. Kokeb, also an occupational therapist and mom, shares her path to research the brain and the connection to motor responses, which can directly impact our children's successes and what they specifically need and want to do during the day. In sharing her expertise on primitive reflexes, she also acknowledges the priority and significance of creating a safe, connected environment for our kids. But how do we do that? Well, we discuss her comprehensive program for parents that includes online training, workshops, and an app with targeted exercises, all designed to make supporting your child's development easier and more effective. Plus, as a special bonus for our listeners, you can enjoy a 20% off discount using the code HOMESCHOOLOT. So join us as we learn about Kokeb's groundbreaking work in reflex integration, her valuable resources for homeschool families, and practical tips for recognizing and addressing developmental challenges in children. Thanks for being here. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to be sure you know about the handwriting class offered by Homeschool OT. The podcasts this month are all focused around motor skill development, one aspect of handwriting. And you heard about vision in episodes 5 through 8. Also, simply one aspect that affects handwriting. But there are many others. The class is set up as a month-long deep dive to give an introduction to all of the aspects that affect handwriting. But it doesn't stop there. It also helps to provide solutions through adaptations, curriculums, and assistive technology. It answers the questions, do we actually need to handwrite? And what exactly is dysgraphia, and what do we do about it? So I mentioned that this course is a month long, but I also need to let you know that you have lifetime access. I know how busy parents are, and I recognize that kids change over time. I want you to be able to come back as often to receive the support that you need. And if you purchase this month, July of 2024, I will join you live for a question and answer, and you have access to the monthly book club typically reserved for the OT is In membership, where we will read and discuss Eli Hates to Write. You can find more about this course linked in the show notes or in the shop at Homeschool OT. And more specifically, homeschoolot.com/shop/handwriting-focus-group. I hope to see you on the inside. Now, on with the show. Hey, and welcome back to the Homeschool OT podcast. One of the most common questions that I get is about all of this new research and even just the philosophy or the understanding of primitive reflexes. And so today we are very fortunate to have Kokeb McDonald, who has written books to really discuss the integration of primitive reflexes through play. Kokeb, I'm just going to actually go ahead and turn it right over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your OT journey and how you got to the point of being so passionate about primitive reflexes?
Thank you for the invite and for having me here. Like you said, my name is Kokeb McDonald. I'm an occupational therapist. What got me really interested is this is around 2005 or 2004, right after I became a therapist, was really a need for easy to follow treatment plan and a tool that I was looking at. I was not even really looking at reflexes because there was no information then. It was more of the overwhelm that I felt having 30 plus caseload in my case and not knowing where to begin with my session and having a question of why am I doing this exercise? Like as a new OT, you're told, here are the toys, here it is, play. But in my mind, I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I playing? Why me? Why not the teacher? Why not the parent? What are we missing? Why are we teaching the same thing over and over again? And I was stuck. It was my coworker and we start to research like we're missing something. There's like an underlining something we're missing. So literally there was nothing on the online to find except after like several weeks, probably a month, we landed on primitive reflexes. It was like from Svetlana Maskatova. It was in Poland, and she was not even here yet. It was a research that we found. It's like then it became like we need to find out. And then I took my first class then in 2005, and the minute I went to the one of the course, it just clicked and made sense to understand that where to begin for me as my treatment plan. It became like a starting point for me. And that's how I got into it. And then as an OT, how to bring that back to a play-based therapy. As an OT, we use play for our session. And then, yes, I understood it because it's a vast, if you ever taken one of Maskatova's courses, it's very in-depth. But then you can't really pull in all of them in your session. Our session is play-based. We're in the gym, we have swings, we have balls, we're moving a lot, we're handwriting. So how do we look at that? So I went really in depth in breaking down. So it took years of really working with a lot of clients, a lot of kids to finally get to the point of even writing the book and making sense of it. Now it's easier, but at the beginning, it was a lot of learning.
Yeah, and you were really groundbreaking because I've talked quite a few times about I graduated from OT school in 2008 and I remember vividly going to a daycare center and testing babies' primitive reflexes, but not a thing after that. And it wasn't until another maybe even 10 years, 2015, maybe a little bit before that, when I really started to come across a lot of the research about primitive reflexes. And I think you were a big piece of making all of that happen here in America. And with that said, there actually was an episode that aired last week, July 11th, 2024, all about the basic research of primitive reflexes. Kokeb and I aren't going to go through so much of that today as we're going to focus more on okay, so now we understand primitive reflexes, or at least have a basic understanding of what they could be and the impact of them. Now, what do we do about it? So we're going to focus and spend our time here. So, Kokeb, in that early research that we started to mention, it did talk a lot about this very specific exercises. And in fact, that is still highly recommended frequently. But you are so passionate about integrating this back into play, which is what our kids need and want to do. Can you tell me a little bit more about what your process is within reading and writing, researching, reading and writing?
Yes, first I was learning, I learned the Maskatova method and very hands-on work. And it's very effective and it's very powerful. And I was implementing that. And I still do sometimes with my clients, or my kids mainly, when I'm working with that. But another thing I was looking at, and even other sessions, other treatments also do that, is looking at the natural progression. If we look at the natural progression of developmental of kids, they are integrating. We are constantly integrating. The ones that they need our support or treatment or therapy is that they're not naturally hitting those milestones. That's when a therapist comes in and helps the child. The rest of them, they just naturally do it. It takes a lot of observation and seeing like, how do these kids move? They do have the very repetitive movement patterns that they do over and over again. They do it through play, and they're doing the same thing over and over for a long period of time. And by observing that, and then also in my sessions, when I start to ask them to do specific exercises, really breaking down. One thing I teach, like our program has a certification program, and one of the things I added was anatomy course, just a review, because we forget the functional movements. What is an efficient movement that you need to have in order to do any given task? And then sometimes you see your client compensating a lot. Then you can ask, why is the client or the adult compensating? What's happening that they're not activating certain muscle? Or why is the certain joint flexing? Why not? How come they're not efficiently moving? So once you start to identify, it will really make sense. Like I can easily in a play session and even one people are walking around and I can point out, I'm like, oh, they're compensating, this reflex is kicking in. So yes, the skill takes like a long period of time to understand it. But once you start to identify the natural progression of these reflex patterns and how they embed and the reason behind why they even exist. Like each of them, the reason kids suck and swallow, they latch, they crawl, they roll, and they stand up, they walk. That's all based on these primal reflex motor that is in the body that is necessary for us to have in order to respond to the environment. As I was working with clients and I start to see that, oh, I can see it all over. So once you focus on one thing, like your brain focuses on solving that problem. So you can start to see in a play session, I can see when they compensate. I start to see when they have a hard time, their posture, when they can't sit still or they can't sit up, and you can see those patterns start to come together. And it becomes like I tell my therapist, you become like an investigator when we're looking at their body, and you start to see what's happening. You can ask them to do a task and you can see certain reflexes firing, and the child having a hard time catching or maybe hard time writing or copying from the board. And then you can have your baseline and you start working on it.
So this is all super fascinating. And I think as therapists, you're right that we're always breaking things down and looking specifically at, wait, how should you be moving at this point? But what about some parents? So if they're watching their kids and saying, oh, I don't know what looks weird, or I don't know how I would see that, what are some tips, or not necessarily tricks, but some strategies that you would help or give to parents in looking for this?
Yeah. With parents, it's usually the easiest place to see because they're not therapists. I wouldn't expect them to think the way we do. The same way we can't think the job they do. So we're very in tune with what we do. But as a parent, we have parent instinct. Like when you start to feel that something is wrong with my child, I say go with that gut feeling and then get the help. Ask therapists and ask a specialist to actually help you. Like, why is my child is having a hard time with this? Whatever your gut feeling is, I don't know how to explain that, but go with that. That's the first thing I'll say. And then get the right specialist to help you with that. And then the right specialist we can identify for you. And if you don't have another child, another thing that's helpful is if you have another child, all of a sudden you start to see the difference. Unfortunately, the parents who start with their first child having special needs, it's harder to determine what's wrong or is natural. And sometimes when the second child comes and they start to see, oh my gosh, that totally makes sense now. But if you have multiple kids, you don't want to compare them to being like each other. But there are things you will see that it's a little bit outside the norm. And you don't have to fix it. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to do it yourself. There's enough help, enough specialists there. It can be overwhelming to think like the same way you don't act like your own dentist. So you need a specialist helping you. So don't feel like you have to take it on. There are a few things you can do. There's so many fun and easy things you can implement that will help their development because you do have access as a parent to your child. And there's a lot of things you are already doing that a specialist can tell you to do a little bit more of to help your child's development.
I love that kind of talking about the tweaks. And one of
Yeah.
the things that you mentioned there was we're not necessarily comparing our children, but you also might recognize when something is just looking a little odd. For example, my son, when he was crawling as a little one, I'd be like, what's with that janky leg is what I called it. He's crawling along and he had one leg left behind him that he was leaving. And now clearly that's not something where I'm like, whoa, like what are we going to do here? But in actuality, as time went on, we did realize that visually he was not scanning, he had convergence insufficiency. Then later on, I realized more about his because of his birth, and it ended up being the ATNR reflex at that point. There are big pieces where you can just say, there is something that looks a little off here. And then it's not alone schooling. We talk about this all the time. We have the privilege of building our own team and finding someone, but it doesn't mean that we have to do it all alone. I need to interrupt for just a second to thank our sponsors, CTC Math. Our family has been using CTC Math for several years. We began when my daughter literally told me, "Mom, your brain doesn't work like mine." And she was right. In fact, all three of my kids learn math at different paces and require different strategies. That's the beauty with CTC Math. You can cater to each of them. My daughter literally started her day with CTC because her brain was fresh and she felt encouraged to get one thing done before joining our family for breakfast and our family morning time. She utilized CTC until she was ready for dual enrollment at our local community college. It's important to note she completed pre-calculus at the college level as a high school sophomore. So clearly, CTC prepared her well. Now my middle son learns more concretely and experientially. As a result, concepts like fractions and algebra are harder for him to visualize. Thankfully, CTC Math allows him to move between grade levels and review concepts as needed. Interestingly, we're taking the advice of Temple Grandin in her book Visual Thinking and focusing on geometry before more algebraic concepts this year. Then, if we need to skip around for more explanation, we can do that. Again, the beauty and benefit of CTC. Finally, my youngest son loves CTC because he's engaged by the colors, the Australian accent, and the ability to engage with math on the computer. Each lesson has a beginning and an end that are clear, so he knows how much more he has. Some may think that these details don't matter, but for some kids, they can make or break an experience. And as an OT, I absolutely consider the sensory components. You can find out more about this fantastic program at ctcmath.com. Now, back to the show. So, you obviously don't just write, but instead you're helping families to put this kind of into practice. So, what are some changes that families are seeing as they're using your books and your services?
Yeah, they're seeing a lot of great progress, and it's very exciting for me to see that I can create something that is simplified. That was my goal. My goal is someone to make it so basic that a parent can quickly pick it up and do an exercise. My goal was for a therapist who's busy to pick up even one of the books and can do a session. And even when we design some of the exercises, to the goal and the expectation is the designs will be easily read or understood by nonverbal clients. So that's how much that I wanted to make it simple, because what I was looking at as a result, it's like, what can we do very quickly that will get us to the result? Because there's always time when it comes to child development. So that piece is exciting. I have parents who say the child started to develop really fast, and exciting to see that. It's amazing to me. Sometimes I even write a review of saying like that their child starts saying the first word. That's amazing. I'm not a speech therapist.
Yeah.
And that's just by them not having even a therapist nearby and just they picked up the book and they start working on it. That's even before we created the app. We have an app that walks them, that's done for you, home program and school program that they can use. That's just by looking at the exercises, the books themselves. And that's been really exciting to see. Another thing that's exciting to see is once the parent starts to understand it's not power struggle, because sometimes it's easy to think that the child is having some behavioral problem instead of seeing having more compassion, starting to understand, oh, their body is not responding in the way mine is responding,
Right.
because we project our understanding or how we perceive the world. But once they start to understand, almost like putting them in the body of that person and have more compassion and understand they're perceiving something different and
Differently. Yes.
responding. And that kind of makes the power struggle more compassion, more understanding, more patient,
Mhm.
and walking them through it instead.
Now, for those parents who are saying, okay, so I understand a little bit. You're telling me that I'm going to play with my child, but maybe I'm going to do it in a different way. Can you give us an example of what one of these exercises slash play-based therapy would look like?
The simple one, I've given different home exercises depending on the child and depending on obviously the parent, how
Mhm.
much time. So the first thing I probably ask if I'm working with a parent would be, or I have actually a therapist working with me, and what I will advise them for home program is how much time do you have to put into this, and in understanding of what do you already do in your session, because we don't want to add anything on top of the stress of parenting already. So it's really using your own schedule
Mhm.
already. The beauty of it when you're doing play-based is as a parent, you're already doing a lot. You're taking him to
Right.
the park, you're going out to play with your child, you may be going something, right?
Mhm.
You can just, let's say, use you going to the park and using the play structure. And then you can actually create a complete home program just on that. I can work on the moral reflex, the hand grasp, and all that, just even working on the monkey bar. Like just that exercise alone. For us, we can call it exercise. For the child, that's something that a parent can do. You can walk
Right.
them through, you can break it down and see, even to just do a monkey bar, there's so many reflexes to integrate. You have the TLR you're going to work on, you have the moral reflex, and even to work on the moral reflex, the hand grasping to integrate, as it takes alternating hand grasp, upper body strength. That's just one thing you can do. It can be a ball game that you're going to do. For the specialist working with the parents, it's breaking it down. Instead of frustrating the child, you can break it down, help the parent how to support the child. And consistency and frequency, right? And not to also forget the child's mindset too, because that's something that they might have to work. So it can be just one thing. And then for a super overwhelmed parent, they don't have the time, the child has anxiety. And I've given out a home program first by cuddling with your child. I know it sounds funny, but really, and then is this even therapeutic? But it is. Like some kids need with the anxiety, especially, and have tactile defensive, and they need to calm down, and you need to work on that. And you
Uh-huh.
know that need to bond because there's a lot of power struggle. That the first thing, sometimes I have started out the first activity being bundling in with heavy blanket, they cuddling together, reading a book, like start there. And then add one more thing, because you just have to meet them where they're at.
I
So
love that
bonding.
you're saying that for sure. We talk a lot in the homeschool community about what's connection before curriculum. It's connection in this spot before we're going to add in something new. And especially even if we're talking about play, right? That connection between the parent and the child and this
Very important.
fit between the two is where we need to start. So that's such an important recommendation and for parents here.
Yeah, bonding is when it comes to a parent, we have to, because I'm a therapist and a mom, and you
Mhm.
probably can relate too. Because when those sometimes I can be more of a therapist than a mom, and that's not what they need. I
Right.
have to back off. So I have to be the mom first, and what the parent, what my kid needs the most from me is connection and bonding. before I can worry about that problem with us as a therapist is we see all the problems. You want to fix it, and that creates more anxiety, and that's not what the child needs. I'd rather send them somewhere else instead, and I'd rather bond and create that safe environment.
And especially when we're thinking about in our own home where we are thinking about what is the environment right now, what is surrounding you, what makes you feel safe. We're looking at your routine throughout your day of when are times that your kiddo feels safe versus when are the times within the day that your child is interpreting what's happening. Because I remember you mentioning the perception of your child may not be perceiving what's happening in the same way that you are. When are the times that they are and being regulated and able to work with you, and or when are they not, and is that predictable? So these observation, what you've been talking about of being a student of your child, can be really, so we're going to start with safety and the observation and being a student of your child before we dive into, okay, so what actually can I do through these play activities? Oh, I love this so much. I hope that really helps parents if you're listening and you're going, where do I start? That's your permission to start with the love and the observation to Kokeb's resources.
If you look at it in the development, also these primary motor reflexes, or you can call it primitive reflexes, they are housed in the brainstem where our survival is. And that is the reptilian brain part of our brain. So the most important thing, what it cares, is to survive and to feel safe. And if we don't first have that, we can't go to the next level. That's why usually in a session, if a child is coming in, for instance, has a lot of regulation challenges, emotional challenges, and we testing, you see a lot of fear paralysis, more ATNR, and then it's a lot. And where do we start? I usually start with safety. Like the child has to feel safe with you. Then the guards are down. Then you can get to the next level. That might also include mindset work. It might be working on getting the support that you need and how to even communicate with your child. It will include your own energy, your own anxiety, because energy and anxiety transfers. Our energy transfers. So sometimes we are the problem coming into a session. And then just understanding that, I'm like, okay, maybe today's not the day to push, or our agenda can come into play too. Think of this more of a holistic approach, and there's no one size fits all. Even creating the reflex integration through play was not supposed to be a curriculum. I don't believe in that. It's more of a holistic approach, and each child has to be considered by influencing, especially if there's an emotional dysregulation, we have to be aware of.
When parents are looking at all of your different resources, can you explain more? Because you've said you've got an app, you've got all these different books. Explain a little bit more about what the options are and what you have out there for parents.
For parents right now, we have what we're calling the family bundle. It includes an online training resources that for parents to just walk through what these reflex patterns may look like and how to observe it in their child. In addition, we have created app support that all the exercises and resources, they have the exercises video format and designs as well, and exactly what to look for, what positive signs, possible negative signs, how to modify, all in the app. If they have a therapist working with them, the therapist can design a playlist, directly share back and forth. And as part of the bundle, we also created a group that they can hop on and then ask question, get additional support. I try to do more of frequently training, and if they have questions, we do videos and add it to the learn section so they can do that. So as they work with their kids, they can easily show their child the exercises done for them. Because what I found is when you're creating a home program, a school program, the challenge is you have to train that person.
Right.
And after you train them, you kind of counting on them doing it correctly, but then there is lack. So instead, we just went ahead and created it ourselves. So I don't have to worry about the parent needs to learn it. Yeah, sometimes it happens that the adults, us, we need integration ourselves, so we might be teaching it wrong. So it cuts the problem there.
Right. Which actually is a very interesting question that I had someone ask me, and we talked through the other day. How often are you, when we're working with parents, are you seeing these kind of integration within parents happening as well?
Yeah, most of the time. You can see it with parents. I see it with teachers. When I
Yeah.
train teachers, it's always fun because there's always a lot of laughs because I will teach hand exercises, progression, and you can see people having difficulty. These are teachers. These are these are the adults ourselves.
Right.
Because what we do is we learn to compensate.
Hmm.
Our brain is so smart, right? So we constantly compensate and we get the work done. Yes, it will take us 10 times the energy than the other one, but we do it so you think you're okay, but you would not. But then you ask the teachers or the parents, then they will start to go back and they say, oh yeah, I had ADHD and I have a hard time reading. It took me a while and I had this. And they will start to name all these things that they have a hard time.
But is that the most efficient, right? Because there are people that say, why does this really matter if you're crawling with your legs sticking out or you're not? Like, why does that actually matter? So when you're saying that you might, sure, learn how to compensate for it, but it can take you 10 times the energy. Whereas
Yeah.
if we're helping to support in this way through playing with our kids specifically,
Yeah.
we can make a big difference and save them their time and their energy and their own frustration. Because nobody wants
Yeah.
their kids frustrated, right?
Yeah, it's efficiency, right? So like the most trying to do the work with most efficient. And I think that our body and brain wants that too. Like
Mhm.
even when you exercise, you feel better when I have a back injury, for instance. And I can see like when I'm not stronger, when I'm not working out and some part of my muscles are not activated, my
Mhm.
back goes out. Right. So because I'm overusing one part of
Right.
my
Mhm.
muscle. And it can be similarly with kids, and I will fatigue easily. It's the same thing. It's the same
Yep.
thing as learning too. The kid will fatigue easily, they might not complete, they're frustrated, and then other things will happen. And you
Mhm.
wondering why is not motivated? Why is this happening? Instead, I'm like, maybe let's go back and
Yeah. And find
uh
that underlying issue.
yeah,
Mhm.
let's make it easier. We actually don't have to make things harder.
Yes. 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 We do not want to be making things harder.
Why? Why should we?
So now, Kokeb, you have a discount code and some more information just for homeschool OT listeners. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, of where it is and how?
Yes, so we have, if you go to integratingreflexes.com and to the Learn section and the family bundle for parents, you will see a program for parents that includes support. It's about supporting your child's development with play-based and low-stress approach, where we have a training for you, a little bit of training, online training that you can access. We have about a 2-hour workshop that you can access, and then also have an app support with all the exercises, about 100 plus exercises, and plus while we're adding more for you to have. You can access all that, and if you use the OT as a code, you
Mhm.
get a 20% off from the program. And then you can also be part of our community. You can ask us to join, or we'll walk you through it to join our community. And so you can get additional support, because we know that some of you will not have access to a therapist.
Mhm.
At least the community, while you're finding a therapist, can support you. And then I actually check that community as well currently, and making sure that questions are answered. So feel free to join and get support.
Fantastic. And one of the roles of homeschool OT is to make sure that we're providing the best resources and recommendations to the homeschool families around the world. And so to be able to provide this is really exciting. So thank you so much for doing
Yeah.
that. And so before we go, just where can people find you besides, and we will make sure that's linked in the show notes. Are you other places besides the website?
I am at the website, and we do have a Facebook group and primitive reflex and I think integration exercises. That's what's called right
Okay.
now. But our page is called Reflex Integration Through Play on our Facebook. And then currently, I'm also having my YouTube channel too, working on that, and Coca McDonald. So that would be the one you can find me. And yeah, reach out. You can email us as well. Once you go to our website, you can email us and ask us questions.
Love it. And we'll make sure that all of that is linked in the show notes. And as well, there's always a blog post that goes out about all of these exciting opportunities. And so we'll make sure that all of this is linked in there too. And you can find that at homeschoolot.com. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing your expertise with our homeschool families.
No problem. Thank you so much for the invite.